Okay, so I have a pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Matthew Clark from Partners And. So Matthew has been risk management partner at Partners And is more recently in the role of cyber director. Matt has over 30 years experience in international risk management and insurance, specialises in science and technology businesses, including those working in IT, communications tech, life science, nanotech, artificial intelligence, clean tech, fintech, and media tech. So a very extensive experience there. Matt is a chartered insurance risk manager with experience in the US, Middle East, and Far East. Over to you, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't need to introduce myself any more than that, so thank you. And thanks very much for CCDC and One Nucleus for having us along today. So I'm coming at this from a slightly different angle. I'm a risk manager and insurance specialist, and that's normally enough to send people off to sleep at this point in time. But what we have found in recent years is that we are increasingly being called upon to help organizations in all sectors, actually, but certainly in science and technology-based areas, with securing their data and networks and dealing with the consequences that can impact them when things go wrong, when they do get hacked, when they do suffer some kind of intrusion or breach. So it was a fascinating insight from Keith as to his experience and the layered approach he's taken in response to that. I'm going to take things back to basics, if you'll permit me, just to make sure that we are contextually kind of setting the scene for you a little bit here. So whatever sector we're in and whatever flavor of life sciences you might be involved in, technology is going to be playing a key role in your organizations. I know that for sure without knowing what your organizations are. I just know that you'll be heavily dependent upon data, systems, and people to interpret those data and systems and process them. So technology that you're using is revolutionizing your life. It's making the work that you do super efficient and very easy and straightforward. But of course, what it's also doing is creating a new threat landscape for cyber criminals, a new way that they can attack you and perform criminal activity against your organizations. And it's that which insurance exists to deal with. So most people don't realize it, but cyber insurance is a thing. It exists, and it's there to protect businesses, not just after an event's happened, but sometimes and increasingly before an event's happened as well. And what's very critical for people to understand is that traditional insurance policies are no good at protecting against this new threat landscape. Traditional insurance is based upon, actually founded upon, marine insurance contracts that were put together over 400 years ago to deal with protecting merchants who are moving cargo around the world, around the oceans. And it's only until actually very recently, 2015, that the legislative framework around insurance has caught up with this. Previously, the main act governing insurance was called the Marine Insurance Act, literally the Marine Insurance Act, and it was over 100 years old. And it's only recently that we've actually got some new legislation that deals with insurance and builds a framework around how insurance can be conducted. So we now live in a world where where there are 500,000 hours of content uploaded to YouTube every minute of every day, where there's over 1 million e-commerce transactions every minute of every day on planet Earth, where there's 208 million emails sent every minute on planet Earth, where over 250,000 people are logging on to Zoom every minute to have a chat. So an insurance company framework, an insurance act framework, which is over 100 years old, is not really relevant to that. And a lot of the traditional policies are not going to help you. You need specialized insurance, specialized risk management to deal with this. And if you just think about all the other services that you rely upon, from perhaps outsourced service provision from a managed service provider, from cloud partners who are managing and processing data for you, even e-banking and email tools that don't reside in your network, they're something you subscribe to. You have a fairly evolved dependency on other businesses who should also have excellent cybersecurity to stop you being hacked and having an impact upon you. So when we talk about cyber in terms of insurance, we're talking about a modern form of crime. And we're talking about a modern form of crime for which we need a modern form of insurance, which is cyber insurance. So in terms of what we're, the threats or perils, if you like, that we're concerned about protecting ourselves against, it's theft. We talked about the potential theft that happened here at the CCDC. In fact, I was thinking it could obviously very much be people trying to steal and not pay a subscription and have easy access to your fantastic data set here, your structured data set here. But it could also be people who want to extort money from you by locking you out of access to your own data, taking down all of your fantastic online streaming services and data sharing services with malware attacks, and then trying to extort money in return for giving you access back. That's probably a key threat vector for you as well. And ransomware certainly has been a major problem broadly across industry the last few years. So theft of data, theft of funds. You know, mine's is a business that is a financial services company. We're constantly taking money from clients, taking our slither of it, and then passing the rest on to insurance companies. So we've got millions of pounds flowing through our bank accounts every day. We're being hacked because the bad guys, want to get hold of that cash. They want to perform funds transfer fraud. They want to take over our email accounts and send fraudulent invoices to our clients, all kinds of things to get hold of our cash. If I were in life sciences, I'd be concerned because I would be hacked because people want to get hold of my intellectual property. They want to get hold of the data that we have, particularly if it's very, very valuable data, which tends to be really sensitive data. Private healthcare information, for example, particularly if you're conducting clinical trials and that sort of thing in the life science space, that's a massive issue that you need to be alert to. But they're trying to take control of or damage networks. They might just damage or delete data just for the heck of it, because that's the way they woke up feeling that they would deal with the world that day. And of course, overlying all of this is that we're all subject to a regulatory framework here. We're all subject in this country to the data protection legislation that exists here. We have to adhere to the strictures of that and get on the front foot with reasonable data security and network integrity. So let's think of cyber risk as the potential for all of that to go wrong, and the downstream financial and reputational and operational consequences of that for most organizations can be quite severe. And in terms of how often this occurs, and in relation to Keith asking that sensible question as to, who else has this happened to, and how can I get information, how can we collaborate and share information about our experiences? The government puts out research every year in the form of its cybersecurity breaches survey. There are loads of other surveys, but this is something which is actually pretty good because it's relevant to the UK. Almost 40% of UK businesses have reported at least one cyber attack in the past 12 months. So if you think about that for a second, if I was saying to you almost 40% of UK businesses had suffered a fire in the last 12 months, or a flood, or had been sued for giving bad advice, those risks exist, but they don't exist nearly to the extent that cyber does. So for most of our clients, and particularly in science and technological sectors, cyber is now their number one risk profile. It's the one type of insurance that they're likely to need to make a claim on, far more so than more traditional types of coverage. And we can get hung up quite easily on all the terminology and jargon that exists in this space, and there's heaps and heaps of it. And it's important that you're aware of some of this stuff, but I tend to encourage people to think of cyber risk not so much in terms of the various different types of cyber attack that can occur, but in terms of its outcomes. So in terms of its outcomes, if you breach data, if data is stolen from you, if data is hacked from you and then breached, posted online, for example, you can incur a liability for that. You can be liable to the data subject, the person whose data has been made public, and they can sue you for not securing their data properly. That will involve you having to legally defend yourself. That may involve you having to pay compensation or damages and claimants costs and things like that. So having an insurance policy that protects you against all of those contingencies might be a good idea. Of course, for most businesses, reputational damage is going to be fairly critical as well. And even here, insurance has a role to play, which we'll come on to a little bit later on. And of course, you can, if you haven't taken reasonable steps to secure data, you could arguably be in breach of the Data Protection Act, and the regulator, the Information Commissioner, can investigate you for that and levy fines and penalties and regulatory impositions on you for that. And again, insurance has a role to play there, as we'll see soon. All stemming from theft of funds, data, damage to networks, and extortion arising from those online modern forms of theft of cyber activity. So before you even think about insurance, I would encourage you to practice a little bit of self-help. And Keith's gone into detail on his story here as to what he ended up doing to provide that layered approach to making his system, his network and data more robust. And there's no one size fits all for this. Each business has its own particular circumstances which dictate different types or different array of cybersecurity. So this is by no means a complete list, or indeed something that everybody has to do. But these are basic kind of self-help steps. So staff training and awareness is massively critical. Insurance company claims data for cyber losses shows us that 88% of cyber attacks are successful because of human error. Someone's clicked on something they shouldn't, someone's given away information in a phone call that they shouldn't, they've been phished or socially engineered. If you can train your staff to recognize those kinds of attacks, you're already turning them into your first line of defense, right? So that's one thing. Certainly, if you try to get this insurance companies will want to know what you're doing about training your staff. It's a very critical, basic form of cyber security. Of course, you've got to make sure that you've got good firewalls in place, good malware protection, good antivirus. Those only really work if you're subscribed to something which is constantly being updated and patched and renewed every time new malware is discovered, and your antivirus provider is updating their software. We've talked about strong password policies. I won't labour the point there too much. Multi-factor authentication is super important, and most insurance companies now demand additional layers of authentication before they'll give you cyber insurance. And the statistics show that you're twice as likely to suffer an assault if you don't have an additional layer of authentication. You've given us your username and password, we still don't trust you, we want you to enter this PIN number or whatever it is that we've just sent to your phone. Device encryption is normally something that's a very good idea, and of course protecting your remote access points has become really important since the pandemic highlighted the fact that suddenly people were having to work from home, not always doing that in a very secure fashion. And I think also one thing that we've spent a lot of time talking to clients about is accreditation standards. The UK government has a standard, Cyber Essentials Plus. These are very basic forms of accreditation standards. If you can achieve Cyber Essentials accreditation, you're already doing a lot of this stuff, actually. It's forcing you to think about getting on the front foot with good cybersecurity. So I would encourage you to look into that. Increasingly, it may well be, particularly if you're doing business with the public sector, NHS contracts, for example, that you have to have that in place anyway. And it could be that if you've got a really complex data dependency, that you might have to have other types of accreditations to ISO accreditations, for example. So there's no one size fits all, but those are some of the basic elements that we tend to see. And in terms of the way that insurance works, and I should say that insurance is still a massively undersold class of insurance. Cyber insurance, I mean. Some research by one of the major insurance companies for cyber estimates that only that less than 15% of UK SMEs buy insurance against cyber attack. So it's all to play for in terms of businesses getting on the front foot with this risk and making sure that they're properly protected. And what myself and my colleagues spend a lot of time doing is attending these kinds of events, educating people as to the availability of cyber and what the insurance industry can do to help you get on the front foot with good cyber risk management, good cyber security, and cyber insurance that is the ultimate blanket of protection should things go wrong. So how does a typical cyber insurance policy work? Cyber insurance, I think it's easy to break it down into two bits. So first of all, it protects against liability. We talked about data breach, privacy breach, and confidentiality breach. So if you have data that's been stolen or breached and you incur a liability for that, the policy steps in and protects you. It provides lawyers to legally defend you against against litigation. It pays for settlements, it pays for damages, it pays for claimants' costs, it pays for all kinds of expert witness fees. It's a blanket of liability protection in the same way that all of your businesses will have a very basic form of mandatory insurance, employer's liability. So if a staff member gets injured because of the work that they're doing for you, work-related injury, you have to have that to protect the business against all the legal consequences of that. The same thing essentially for a privacy-related cyber breach. And if you remember my opening statements, you can't rely upon your typical business insurance to cover this. Normally it's a specific exclusion. Cyber-related loss is now a specific exclusion. So you need this kind of policy to plug that gap and protect you against liability. And it could be that, as with CCDC, that you have people who are subscribing to a service, subscribing to your platform, and are paying money to access data and services. And if you can't provide that because you've been hacked, suffered a ransomware attack, for example, then they're going to be upset by that because they're paying you this money and they can't access those services. They might allege that you're in breach of contract for that. You might find that you're facing a class action lawsuit for that kind of activity. So some sort of denial of service trigger is always important to have in the policy as well. So you're protected against that kind of liability. Second thing a cyber policy does is that it protects against your own losses. So the stuff at the top here is third party. That's third parties, people who aren't part of your organization coming at you and threatening litigation. The second part is you. You're the first party. You're the policy holder. It's your organization that's incurring costs in dealing with a breach. It happens as soon as it happens. You've got to figure out what to do. You've got to understand how this cyber criminal got into your system. You've got to understand what data they've seen. You've got to understand what they've done with that. You will incur costs in identifying all of this. You might have to incur costs in notifying individuals whose data has been breached. The regulator might force you to do that. So all of this stuff comes at a cost. It's not you being sued for something, it's just you incurring costs in terms of IT forensics, perhaps in terms of data recovery expertise to help you recover lost data. It could be that you need legal advice or different types of legal advice, and you need to access that instantly because this has just happened and you need a response right away. It could be that to manage your reputational injury, you want to ask for help from a crisis communications consultancy or a public relations expert. And the insurance industry, the cyber insurers have panels of experts waiting in the wings, ready to swing into action for you should the worst happen. So it stops you having to go out and source all of that expertise yourself. And certainly for smaller businesses, they may not have these resources in-house to be able to cope with a cyber attack, and they might need that very valuable panel of providers that the insurance company offers. So that's a super important element of this. So the cyber insurer will essentially handhold during your response and recovery phase. So most insurance policies, particularly the more sophisticated ones now, they tend to have smartphone apps, and they can connect the policyholder or the policyholder's IT manager to a breach response triaging desk on a 24/7 basis. So if they become aware that they've been hacked, they've got someone at the end of the phone who can help them straight away, and they can start to bring in all of those services that they need, from forensics to lawyers to people who can help them with an extortionist, perhaps. Extortion consultancy is a critical one as well. And the insurer, of course, bears all the burden for that. So they have these guys ready to fly under service level agreements. They know the quality of the work. They've got a good pedigree. They're bona fide. They're available to you 24/7. Imagine having to find all of that if you were going it alone without insurance. It would be an absolute nightmare. So from that point of view, cyber insurance is a sort of insurance as a service type of offering, in my view. I'm going to coin that phrase, actually. I think it's quite a good one. And it's ultimately balance sheet protection, because all of the costs of all of those experts is met by the insurers. Okay, but it's also reputational protection too. So you can show the world that you're recovering from an event. You can deal with the regulator. You can avoid, hopefully, onerous fines and penalties, which the policy will also pay if they're levied against you. And as well as the extortionist, actually, the insurance policy will pay an extortion payment. And if it's the quickest way, everyone agrees it's the quickest way to end a cyber attack, the policy will pay. And the idea is that we're getting you through this problem, we're getting you back on your feet, we're enabling you to carry on functioning as an entity, safe in the knowledge that the insurer is dealing with everything for you behind the scenes. So I've whizzed through that, I'm conscious, quite quickly. I'm happy to take any questions. Oh, my colleague, actually, I didn't set her up for this, she's just... Yeah.
Yeah, sorry?
Hannah over there. This better be an easy one, Hannah.
You know the answer. Isn't it fair to say that out of most claims under a cyber policy, actually, it is the own costs that are the largest,
Yes.
as opposed to what is paid to a third party?
Yes. So a bit of research by one of the UK's biggest cyber providers showed that only about 5 or 6% is the third-party coverage in terms of the frequency of claims and the severity of loss. It's the first-party bit, which is where all their losses arise. That's just that insurer, so it could be that reflects their underwriting appetite, but it's very much more likely that you'll need to protect yourself against your own costs rather than being worried about being sued or investigated by the regulator. Although that could change depending upon the yin and the yang of the regulatory response and how the regulator feels it needs to get toothier, perhaps, if people aren't protecting data.
A typical business model in scientific organizations is to spend quite a few years in product development before they start generating revenue. So if you're in that period, pre-revenue, pre-sales, what's your incentive to go down this kind of insurance route?
You may not have to. This insurance isn't mandatory. It's often for science and tech businesses, we increasingly find it's a contractual obligation, and particularly if they're funded. So if there's a VC or private equity house or investors of one type or another involved, it may form part of a funding agreement where they say we want you to be adequately insured, and that their advisor then says that means you need to have this in place. But I think even if they're pre-revenue, they will probably still be producing a lot of data, particularly if they're building prototypes or investigating new chemical entities or whatever it is that their particular business is all about. Certainly our experience, whether it's biotechnology businesses or small pharma or medical device developers, or particularly anyone involved in things like protein sciences and advanced stuff like regenerative medicine, synthetic biology, there's vast amounts of data that they're producing, and that's critical information. Even if it's a drug discovery business that it has to meet various milestones, I would want to make sure that my additional costs of working, if I get hacked just before that milestone payment's about to happen, and I have to repeat a lot of work because I don't have access to all that data anymore, I'd want to know that there's a safety blanket financially in place for me there to pick up the costs of doing that. Additional ongoing research. That's a good question.
Yeah, so my question is more around the trends of cyber attacks that insurance companies are paying out for. Is it trending more towards human error, somebody clicking on a link and bringing backdoor encryption into the organization, or is it more that hackers have penetrated an organization and then hacked in and taken control of the system? So it's just really understanding, the percentage of those two types of attacks.
For the last couple of years, certainly it's been all about ransomware. Malware attacks, essentially, and there's all sorts of different ways that the bad guys act there, but social engineering attacks that result in their ability to compromise a network and deliver an exploit, deliver some kind of malware to your system is a common way in. Brute force hacks still exist, and where you've got businesses that haven't done enough to protect their organizations, their security, their technology, they may suffer from that, but it's all been about ransomware in the insurance market, at least the last couple of years. second to that would be business email compromise, and the funds transfer fraud that often accompanies that. But that's tended to be what's been of most concern to insurance companies, cyber insurance companies over the last few years.
You mentioned the statistic about 40% of companies having suffered a cybersecurity issue. What's that sort of percentage in the life science sector and technology sector? I mean, maybe life sciences might be easier. And what are the main businesses that are more targeted, would you say?
Yeah, it's really difficult to find reliable data on that, because different reports exist. Particularly, another really good one is the IBM Ponemon report that comes out every year. And that tends to break things down in a very American way. So the life science sector might come under a heading like healthcare or something like that. And you have to look at the small print to see what sectors they're including within that. For the most part, it's manufacturing right now, which is facing the most attacks. Manufacturing and financial services sector, they're often swapping that particular baton between them year on year. But certainly healthcare in the US faces a lot of challenges, because healthcare patient data is very valuable to the bad guys. They can use it to commit healthcare fraud, insurance fraud, and all kinds of other stuff. So that's the best way I can answer that without giving you a specific number, I'm afraid.
Just adding to that as well, I mean, talking about statistic in the insurance market, obviously that is only for people who bought cyber in the first place. So saying how many losses there have been doesn't actually say how many attacks there were or losses that were uninsured, because that's so again, the 40% is only people who told you that they had an attack. There might be other people who decided not to tell, so it's quite hard to get true statistics about it.
It's true. It's bound to be a lot higher than that. It's epidemic proportions. How are we doing for time? Am I okay?
If an organisation was interested in taking up cyber insurance, is there a minimum level risk management that you as an insurer would insist on being in place before you awarded the insurance?
Good question. This is very topical right now in our space. So I think if you're coming to me and asking me to go into the insurance market for you to arrange insurance as an intermediary, that's what I do. I would do a deep dive on your current understanding, what your current digital estate looks like, what you're using data for, how you're using it, what dependencies you have in terms of technology. Understanding that, I would look at then what your existing cybersecurity defenses look like, and then we can identify if there's any gaps. We can suggest ways of plugging them. But insurers will probably mainly focus upon staff training as being an absolute requirement, and multi-factor authentication, or at least two-factor authentication, some additional layer of authentication that you would need. But it depends very much on the individual client. Everyone's different, and if you've got a very, very sophisticated, clean room based drug manufacturing element, there'll be a lot more sophisticated cybersecurity that you need to do around protecting your computer controlled production processes, and so on. The other thing that it's good to have is a good story to tell about your attitude towards risk, basically. So insurers will ask questions about, what policies and procedures do you have in place for things like bring your own device, as we talked about earlier. Do you have policies and procedures in place that govern what information people can access within your own business? Because I need to access information on our system about our clients, but I don't need to see what our finance people see. I don't need to access their system. So having a kind of hierarchy of data access is a good idea as well, but it's all sorts of things that go into that.
Just to go into that point that you said, so something like if you had ISO certification on your quality management system, that's going to add a benefit, surely, in that situation, so it would cover that.
It forces you to think about these things.
Okay.
And it forces you to have a framework around them and a policy, an approach to them. And then having that kind of solution in place is super useful. Because Keith and CCDC had a few attacks, if I went straight into the insurance market to say, oh, I need insurance, these guys have been attacked, the insurers would be, well, hang on a minute, what have they done to identify how they got attacked, and what have they done to stop it happening in the future? Naturally enough, an insurer is going to want to know that. So if I go back in with Keith's wonderful slide about all the different layers of stuff that he's put in place insurers are going to be like, super, we'll give you insurance for that. But because it's great that you have all of that security in place, but it doesn't guarantee you're not going to get hacked. It's not a silver bullet. Okay, so British Airways has a massive cybersecurity team and they spend millions of pounds every year on cyber defense, but they still get hacked, right? So insurance is a good ultimate backstop.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Brilliant. So we now have a short break and we'll be back at 5, so just over 20 minutes. So there's some more teas and coffees, biscuits, help yourself. And to those online, join us back at 5 o'clock. Thank you. Thanks all.